There's a quiet moment that tends to arrive somewhere after 60. It doesn't announce itself with drama, and it doesn't come with a clear beginning or ending. It often shows up in an ordinary situation. You might be driving a familiar road, sitting with your morning coffee, flipping through an old photo, or waking up earlier than you used to. Nothing remarkable is happening on the surface, but internally something shifts. A simple thought drifts in. I see myself differently now. Not better, not worse, just clearer. Most men don't talk about this moment, but many recognize it instantly when it's described. Because after 60, something subtle begins to loosen. The constant need to prove fades. The pressure to impress quiets. The background hum of comparison starts to lose its grip. And in that quieter space, realizations surface. Not the loud cinematic kind, the honest kind. One of the first things many men realize is that much of their life was spent preparing to become someone, preparing to be worthy, preparing to feel settled. There was almost always a future version of yourself you were working toward. The man who would finally arrive at confidence. The man who would feel successful enough. The man who would feel at peace. After 60, a strange truth settles in. You are no longer becoming someone else. You are already someone. That doesn't mean growth stops. It means the nature of growth changes. It becomes less about transformation and more about refinement. Less about proving and more about understanding. Less about building a persona and more about inhabiting your actual self. Many men realize that they spent decades being harder on themselves than anyone else ever was. They replay mistakes that no one else remembers. They carry guilt for choices that, in hindsight, were made with the information and emotional capacity they had at the time. They judge their younger selves by standards they only developed later in life. After 60, something softens. You begin to see your younger self less as a disappointment and more as a human being doing his best with limited tools. That shift alone can feel like taking a weight off your chest that you didn't even realize you were carrying. Another realization creeps in quietly. The things you once believed would define your happiness didn't quite do what you thought they would. The job title, the income milestone, the house, the recognition. They mattered, but not in the lasting way you imagined. You start to notice that the memories that surface most often are not about achievements. They're about moments, conversations, people, small choices, unexpected kindness, times you showed up, times someone showed up for you. This doesn't mean ambition was pointless. It means ambition was never the whole story. Many men after 60 realize that their real legacy isn't what they built, but how they made people feel. Not in a sentimental way, in a grounded, undeniable way. You can often sense it in how people speak to you now, in whether they seek your opinion, in whether they call just to talk, in whether they trust you with pieces of their life. Another realization that surprises a lot of men is how much emotional strength they've developed without ever labeling it as such. You've survived losses, you've adapted to change, you've watched chapters close, you've endured disappointments that once felt unbearable and discovered, slowly, that you kept going anyway. You may not have described yourself as resilient at the time. You were just doing what needed to be done. But looking back, a pattern becomes visible. You didn't collapse. You didn't quit on life. You adjusted. That realization alone can quietly change how you see yourself. Many men also realize that confidence now feels different than it did in youth. When you were younger, confidence often meant asserting yourself, standing out, being certain, projecting strength. After 60, confidence starts to look more like calm. More like knowing what you're not interested in. More like not needing to convince anyone of anything. It becomes internal instead of performative. You notice that you don't feel the same urge to impress. You don't feel compelled to prove intelligence, toughness, or success. You know who you are well enough to let silence exist. You know your values well enough to walk away from what doesn't align. This quieter confidence can feel unfamiliar at first, but it's one of the most stable forms of strength a man ever develops. Another realization tends to land slowly but deeply. You care less about being liked by everyone, and more about being respected by the right people. You start to see how exhausting it was to try to please too many different versions of the world. After 60, many men become more selective with their energy. Not out of bitterness, out of wisdom. You notice which relationships nourish you and which drain you. You notice which conversations leave you feeling grounded and which leave you feeling tense. You start choosing where to place your time with more intention. That selectiveness isn't selfish, it's protective. A surprising realization for many men is that they still have desire. Not just sexual desire, although that may change and evolve. But desire for connection, for meaning, for laughter, for curiosity, for learning, for contributing. There's a cultural story that quietly suggests life shrinks after a certain age. Many men over 60 realize that isn't actually true. What shrinks is noise, what expands is depth. You may find yourself less interested in surface-level interactions and more interested in real conversation. Less interested in quantity and more interested in quality. Less interested in chasing and more interested in choosing. Another realization that often arrives is how much control you actually do have over your internal world. When you were younger, moods felt like weather. They happened to you. After decades of experience, you start to see patterns. You know what destabilizes you. You know what steadies you. You know which habits make life heavier and which make it lighter. That awareness doesn't make you immune to struggle, but it gives you tools. You realize that peace is not something the world hands you, it's something you cultivate. Many men after 60 also notice a shift in how they relate to their past. Earlier in life, the past often felt like something to either escape or obsess over. After 60, it begins to feel more like a long story you've lived through. You don't romanticize it the same way. You don't demonize it the same way. You see nuance. You see where you were naive. You see where you were brave. You see where you were wrong. You see where you were doing the best you could. That balanced perspective is a form of emotional maturity that cannot be rushed. Another realization is that loneliness feels different than it used to. When you were younger, loneliness often felt like failure, like something was wrong with you. After 60, many men realize loneliness is more universal than they were ever taught. Enjoyment doesn't mean constant happiness. It means giving yourself permission to experience moments of contentment without guilt, without feeling like you haven't earned it enough. Many men realize they spent years postponing enjoyment, waiting for some imaginary future where they'd finally deserve ease. After 60, that story starts to fall apart. You begin to see that life was never a test you had to pass. It was an experience you were meant to have. Another realization is that your story is not finished. Even if certain chapters have closed, even if certain dreams didn't happen, even if some paths are no longer available, you are still a living, evolving human being. You can still learn, you can still change, you can still build new connections. You can still surprise yourself. Not in a frantic way, in a grounded way. And maybe the quietest realization of all is this: you don't have to become anyone else. You don't have to catch up. You don't have to make up for lost time. You don't have to rewrite your entire past. You are allowed to stand where you are and say, this is me. This is the life I've lived. This is the man I've becoming. And for many men, that moment feels less like resignation and more like arrival. Not at perfection, at acceptance, at honesty, at a deeper relationship with yourself than you ever had before. And that quietly is one of the most meaningful realizations a man can have after 60.